Welcome back, everybody. Here we are again in Maratika. So today we're in a new room. This is actually the room we're going to be using for the Nyung Nä. We've got a large dormitory here. So at the moment it's empty, but tomorrow we'll have the altar set up and we can show you that tomorrow. Today what we're going to go through is the Sadhana, which I have here with me. We can discuss about the different, what we're going to be doing each day and sort of the meaning behind it. So actually, one thing I wanted to address before we go directly into the sadhana, there was a question yesterday. Actually, it was a very good question about how does this practice of the sadhana, how does this relate to lamrim? So I gave a bit of an answer yesterday, but I gave it some more thought to try to make it a little more clear. And it's not a question I can answer very succinctly, easily, because it's actually a very profound question about what and how does it relate to lamrim. But I just want to say, briefly, I think that we have to think about what is the goal of the lamrim and the practices that Tsongkhapa outlined in the lamrim. And we see that really what's trying to be generated here is what we call the union of calm abiding and special insight. So in the lamrim, the last two sections of the text are the section on calm abiding, which is presented in the context of the perfection, the Bodhisattva's 6 perfections, the 5th one being the perfection of concentration. And so it says, the title of that chapter is Shamatha, or calm abiding, which is the essence of the perfection of wisdom, also the perfection of concentration. And then the last chapter is Vipassana, or special insight, which is the essence of the perfection of wisdom. So it's showing that those 2 chapters are by far the longest chapters in the text. So what's the goal of all of these practices? To generate those paths in our minds. All of the other practices in lamrim are sort of supplement to that. When we meditate on perfect human rebirth, we meditate on death and impermanence, we meditate on the sufferings of samsara. The purpose of these is to turn our minds away from our ordinary grasping at ordinary pleasures, such that we put effort into generating this union of calm abiding and special insight, because that takes an enormous amount of effort to do so. And if we don't turn our minds away from attraction to ordinary objects, then we won't put that much effort in. We might do retreat thinking, it would be great to achieve calm abiding, but not really with a realistic goal of how understanding of what that entails. So we stay in retreat for even a few months or even a few years, but then our mind starts thinking, it would be great to go back to my old life, or to pursue some other kind of goal. This isn't a useful use of my time to be in retreat for this. And we see this happens a lot. So if we haven't prepared our minds with really generated renunciation from all the other contemplations, then we won't have the strength to go through with generating calm abiding and special insight. But ultimately, the purpose of the lamrim is to generate those. As Dharmakirti, for example, says, the great Indian master, that all of the other meditations are supplements. The meditations on impermanence, the meditation on suffering. The main meditation is the meditation on selflessness, because this is actually what counters the afflictions directly. And this is what will bring about liberation. And Asanga said essentially the exact same thing in his text, the Compendium of Manifest Knowledge, the Abhidhamma Samachaya. So then on that basis, when we have this calm abiding and special insight, and then from the sutra path, the sutra understanding of what to do with that, we just keep using that. We just generate the union of calm abiding and special insight, and keep meditating on that continuously over a long period of time. And this is where Tantra comes in. This is where Tantra becomes an important supplement to the path. So really, before we have calm abiding and special insight, and all of us are doing these tantric practices, the main purpose here is it's like we're making an imprint to be able to do this more effectively in the future. And we're also accumulating a lot of merit by doing this and purifying negativities. But until we generate calm abiding and special insight, then it's, the tantric practice doesn't have its full force, because what it's intended for is a way of taking that calm abiding and special insight and enhancing the power of it. Because in tantric practice, what really makes it distinct, so the tantric distinction is sometimes called, is that we meditate in emptiness with calm abiding. We then are able to stay single-pointedly meditating on emptiness. And in the sutra path, when we do so, then no other object appears to the mind. For example, if we take the emptiness of a pot, this is a very common example. You think of a pot, and then you meditate on the lack of inherent existence of the pot. When that lack of inherent existence appears to the mind, the pot ceases to appear to the mind. The pot is like the basis, the object of observation, that then allows us to generate this experience of emptiness. But then within that experience, there's no appearance to the mind of conventional phenomena. So you might notice whenever we do a tantric practice, when we do the sadhana, it starts from the space of emptiness. So this is, when it says the space of emptiness, it's not saying the object emptiness. It's actually talking about the object, the possessor, meaning the mind. So it should really be from the space of observing emptiness. So the distinction here is that without the mind wavering from concentration and emptiness, then conventional appearances of objects appear to the mind. So this is something that in Sutra is not talked about. So we then manifest all these forms of all of these deities and meditate on these within the concentration and emptiness. And if we do so, it said that we can thereby accumulate the accumulation of merit simultaneously with the accumulation of wisdom to our meditation on emptiness. And this greatly enhances the power of both of these, such that it works much more quickly. So we're able to, for example, with Action Tantra, it said that we can traverse the paths of the accumulation and preparation, which usually is meant to take one great countless aeon to do that. We can do that in just a few lifetimes through these practices. And in Nyung Nä, it's not explicitly mentioned much in the practice, except in the lineage prayer. You'll notice we do the lineage prayer at the beginning of every day. It says, "May I generate the concentrations of the absorptions into fire and into sound," which is actually a unique feature of Action Tantra. That if somebody is very advanced in this practice, all these appearances of deities that we're doing is like the preliminary, but actually they can then go into more deeply, where they have what's called the absorption into fire, which is a visualization of fire at the heart, and then the absorption into sound, which is then the sound of the mantra, the empty sound of the mantra, and then finally the absorption into at the end of sound, where that sound there's no longer the appearance of sound to the mind; it's just emptiness at the heart. And when they continue with that, then they can generate the direct perception of emptiness with this. So the point here is that if this all has to be done on the basis of the lamrim. If somebody just tries to do these kinds of practices without understanding the purpose or without the basis of renunciation and bodhicitta, then it either won't be effective or it'll actually be negative. It can really be dangerous to do such things because it can destabilize the mind. But when somebody is ready, then this is an efficacious way to enhance their practice. So for us at the beginning, it's that we generate the intention to do this. We think, I want to follow this path because I recognize the profundity. And then we may not actually be able to do this. We're not literally able to, from the space of direct meditation on emptiness, manifest all these forms and so forth. But we're making the imprint to be able to do that and to train our minds, in doing this. And another thing, as I mentioned yesterday, is that in Tantra we're trying to connect to innate capacities within our minds. So, I mentioned this example of the novelist Robert Louis Stevenson, just having this appearance of these people that just talk to him, that he could and create great literature as a result of that. So there was this, there's natural capacity. And in Tantra, it's understood that we have natural capacities. So when we talk about, for example, calm abiding and special insight, these are in of themselves, they take a long time to generate. It's very hard. In Tantra, it's understood. It's almost like we can connect to an innate capacity for focus in the mind, such that we can generate these mental states more quickly. Because rather than trying to just practice and practice and practice and slowly get there, we're able to connect to something that's already there, that's within us. It's not that it's easy. It's not that this is just like a shortcut that makes everything, we don't have to put much effort. But if we have a lot of merit and very strong blessing, and we practice very sincerely, then it's possible to manifest this more quickly and ultimately more deeply than in the sutra path. So that's just a very brief explanation. It's not, there's a lot more to this, but as I said yesterday, if you're really interested in Tantra, it's very important also to study about it and learn more about why Tsongkhapa felt this was so important, even though he wrote so much on Lamrim. It's useful to consider that Tsongkhapa, I think he had 22 volumes of text, 21, I can't remember, 21 or 22. Of these 13, so more than half, were books on Tantra. So he obviously considered this really important, even though, in the monastery, most of what we study is the exoteric, the sutra path. For people who are have the good grounding in the sutra path, then it's useful to start thinking about what is meant by Tantra. Not just doing the ritual and talking about what empowerments we've had and chasing after getting lots of high tantric empowerments, but more thinking about what this means and considering it. And it's good if we have doubt about it, because it's making some quite wild claims. It's not something we just take on faith. It's something to really think about. So now let's move to the sadhana. So hopefully some of you have this book or downloaded the Nyung Nä book, because you'll need this certainly for the doing the practice at home. Now this edition is the most recent FPMD edition, which is 2015. So if you have another edition, or other editions like in 2005, that's okay, but then the pagination is going to be different, and maybe some of the details, like the translations, might be slightly different. So you just have to be very attentive to where we are in the text, because I'm going to be going based on this text, the 2015 edition. And we've sent out, I believe, a preliminary schedule I made, so that it's clear where we are. You can reference that if you get lost. So on the talking days, I will announce before we start any prayer, now we're on such and such page. But on the days when we're not talking, I won't do that. I can't say anything. When we're in a group, oftentimes I'll just make numbers with my fingers, or have somebody write it on a whiteboard. But since we have this schedule, it shouldn't be necessary. I'm hoping people can follow along. And if it becomes a problem, people are getting lost, and then put it in write to us, and hopefully we can try to find a way to fix that. Maybe not immediately, but by the next session we'll figure out what we can do. Yeah, so we have the list here. Yeah, so you should have received this from Venerable Namjong from CKSL. So in the first practice, I think Namjong also sent some supplementary prayers, or will be sending them. So you'll see in the parentheses it says supplementary prayer book, because at the beginning and end of every session we'll do some prayers that are not in the Nyung Nä book. So there's 3 sessions each day. There's the 4 a.m. session, early morning. Then there's the mid-morning session, 8:30 a.m., and the afternoon session at 3:30 p.m. So we'll try to do the exact same schedule every day. Sometimes when we're in a group, I'll say, oh, and then we'll do such and such dedication prayer, but I won't do that here. We'll try to make it very uniform, so that everyone can keep up where we are. So the first session, the morning, we'll start with the blessing, the speech, and daily mantras, which is in the supplementary prayers. And then after doing that, we'll go to the Nyung Nä book. So the first prayer we do is on page 6, the calling the Guru from afar. And this prayer, as I mentioned yesterday, is very commonly done. It's actually from the Solokhumbu region, from Laudo. So and also the tune that we use when we chant it in Tibetan, it comes from Lama's Rinpoche's tradition. It's not actually from the Sadhana composed by His Holiness, the seventh Dalai Lama. So on the first day, we'll do this in English, mainly because it's faster in English, and because the first morning session we have to be a little attentive to time, because the first session is long, and then we have a long morning session. We have to eat lunch before noon, so we try to do the things a little bit abbreviated. But every subsequent day, we have more time, so we'll chant it in Tibetan. And this calling the Guru from afar is, it's a prayer to our Guru for blessing, but it's also a Lamrim prayer. It goes through the stages of the path. So it's good to, when we recite it in Tibetan, fortunately the English is right here next to it, so you can also look at the meaning, and we go pretty slowly, so you can think about the meaning of it. And then after that, we go right to page 14. You'll see there's two stanzas that are meant to complete that, because there's the abbreviated calling the Guru from afar, which we don't do in the same session with that later. But you skip that and go right to the last two verses, which are the dedication, may I not rise heresy even for a second, and then magnificent and precious root Guru. And then from that, we go to the preparatory ritual. So this is the actual Nyung Nä Sadhana. So we start by doing every day and every session, and we start by reciting the mantra of the lotus family. I mentioned yesterday that Chandra Avalokiteshvara is in the lotus family. Om Padma Ubhavaye Soha. And then when we do that, we also make the mudra of the lotus family. I'll explain the mudras tomorrow, but also just you can see now. You put your palms together, but also you put your thumbs tucked in, like you're holding a jewel. So this is the mudra of the lotus family. And we hold your hands slightly away from your body, and we recite that 5 times. Om Padma Ubhavaye Soha. And then we recite some other mantras you'll see here. And in the first session, then we go right to the next page. We're taking the restoring and purifying ordination, which is the 8 Mahayana precepts. So we go through this. You'll see. We do the invocation. During the invocation, we do this once here, and we do it once in the sadhana during the front generation. So for this, you kneel, that's on your right knee, and you do a mudra. Again, I'll show you again tomorrow, but briefly, it's that you interlace your fingers except for the thumbs and the index finger. You see your index fingers are pointing, so it's invoking the deity, and you kind of beckon with your thumbs. And then we go through, at one point you'll see we get up and prostrate, so that'll be clear. Whenever we're prostrating, you'll see us getting up here, so you can do the same wherever you are. But only 3, or actually 6 prostrations here. 3 with the ecstatic prostration mantra, and 3 to Guru Shakyamuni Buddha. And then the mandala offering we do. So again, if you have a mandala set, you're welcome to use that, but you don't have to. There's no rule that you have to do that, because we have it here. And even if you're in a group, usually only the chant leader does that, so there's no need to. But if you'd like to, you're welcome to do that. And then you'll see we take the actual Mahayana precept ordination, requesting these vows for one day. So now I'll go through the vows, because this is a very important part of the practice. So just to make it clear, when we say 8 Mahayana precepts, or we actually more literally in Tibetan, it's called Tekchen Sojong, which means the Mahayana restoring and purifying. So you might know that, as also I mentioned yesterday, we have 3 sets of vows within Buddhist practice. The first are the Pratimoksha, or individual liberation vows. So there's 7 kinds of individual liberation vows. So as a fully ordained monk, I have what's called Bhikshu, or Gelung vows. Then we have Gelongma, or fully ordained nun vows, Bhikshuni. And then we have novice monk, novice nun, that's 4. And then we also have what's called probationary nun. It's like an in-between between a novice nun and a fully ordained nun. So that's 5. Then we have the vows of the lay man, lay woman. That's 7. And then there's an 8th class of the individual liberation vows called the one day abiding, which means that a lay person who wants to take extra vows for one day, they take 8 vows that are sort of a similitude of the vows of a novice monk or nun. And the Buddha encouraged his lay followers to take these vows, especially on the 8th, the 15th, and the 30th of the lunar month. So these vows, they're actually exactly the same vows in terms of what you're abstaining from as the Mahayana restoring, purifying ordination, except that these are within the context of the pratimoksha, the individual liberation vows. So then the next level of vows is the bodhisattva vows. So we took those this morning with His Holiness. And if I have time at the end of the session, maybe I can talk a little bit about that. But then also, as part of bodhisattva vows, we can take the Mahayana restoring and purifying ordination, which means we take one day vows, which again are similar to the vows of a novice monk or nun. It's not exactly the same because a novice monk will have 37 vows, but most of them are quite minor. The major ones are these 8, which we have here. And actually, these 8 include more than 8, the 8 here. But for example, you'll see not wearing perfume, singing, dancing, playing music. For a novice monk, that becomes 3 vows. So you get to 37 by expanding them a bit. But here, as we said, we have 8 vows. We take these for one day. And so each day we'll take them. We take them until the sunrise the next day. And then we take them again the next day. Now in Nyung Nä, the first day we just take them as normal, the 8 Mahayana precepts. But then the second day of every second day, the 2nd, 4th, and 6th day of the Nyung Nä, it also includes the vow not to drink or not to take any food. Usually it's just to take one meal. So not to eat or drink until sunrise the next morning, and not to speak either. And I'll explain more about the details of that when we get to that vow. So the first vow is the vow not to kill, which is a vow that we take anyway as Buddhists. So in any case, it's best not to kill, but we try to be especially attentive to that on these days, which means not even killing insects. If we accidentally kill an insect, we can recite the purification mantra, which I'll explain later. If you make any kind of mistake, we can do that. But to be as attentive as possible to our actions of body, what we're doing. The next is not to steal. So again, a vow that we take anyway as Buddhists, but be very attentive to that. And the third is the vow of celibacy. So, as I said, this is approximating the vows of a novice monk. So as lay people, we take the vow for one day to abstain from any sexual activity. And then, as I mentioned, the Buddha encourages lay followers. So if you're a lay person, you're obviously not taking this vow long term, but if you'd like, the Buddha did encourage lay people to take these vows on the 8th, the 15th, and the 30th. So generally in your life, if it's possible to do that, that's a useful thing to do. And then the fourth one, again, not to speak false words, not to lie, which is something, again, we do generally as Buddhists. Now, in this context of the retreat, since we're in retreat, it's best not to speak a whole lot anyway, whether we're lying or speaking the truth. The second day, we can't speak anyway at all. But even during the first day, if it's possible to limit our speech just to what's necessary for continuing the retreat, that's best. If you're in the context, if you're living with your family and it's going to offend them that you don't speak, then don't worry about that. But as much as possible to try to keep silence and only speak when necessary so that we can generate some kind of inner focus. And then the fifth vow is not to take intoxicants. So if you saw His Holiness this morning, he often mentions this story of this old man who said he couldn't abstain from intoxicants completely, from alcohol. So as Buddhists, generally it's best not to drink alcohol or to take any other kind of intoxicant. But if that's not possible, you can take the vow not to, only not to become intoxicated. But in the context of Nyung Nä or the 8 minor precepts, you really have to be strict about it. So not to take any alcohol or smoke cigarettes or take any other kind of intoxicant. Also, I mean, things like coffee and other kinds of caffeine, it's not restricted. You're allowed to do that, but you might consider, if you like, to think about not taking things that have some kind of effect on the mind, because these things, stimulants, they could be disruptive for meditation. But there's no restrictions. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. The next vow is not to sit on large, high, or expensive beds. So I think I mentioned in the announcement, technically what this means is that your bed shouldn't be higher than the length from your tip of your fingers to your elbow, say 1 cubit. It's sun in Tibetan. So ideally you shouldn't sleep on a bed that's higher than that, and you shouldn't sit in a seat that's higher than that. But that may not be possible if you're living at home and you have a bed that's a certain height. So one option is just to put your mattress on the floor. But if that's uncomfortable for you and you don't, or it's impractical, you don't have to do that. But just when you're taking the vow, have the intention to ask permission. I have to sleep on a bed of such and such height. So imagine that you're asking permission to do so. The main purpose of this is that, especially in ancient India, this indicated status. People who are poor would sleep on the floor, and people who are wealthier would sleep on higher beds. So, as monks, we have this vow in general that we try not to sleep on high beds because it gives us a sense that we're an important person or somebody who is wealthy. So the next, not to eat food at wrong times. So this becomes quite a major vow in the context of Nyung Nä. So what this means, ideally, is that the first day we only have one meal, and it's before noon. Some people interpret that it's before the sun reaches the median, midway. So that sometimes is around 12:30. So it's not necessarily before noon. But we try to finish the second session in the morning before 12, by 11:30 ideally, so that we can start eating before noon. If you want to do it the very strict way, then if you're eating and the clock comes to noon, you stop eating. But most teachers, including Lama Zopa Rinpoche, have said it, that as long as you start the meal before noon, you can keep eating and then finish after noon. It's also the idea that it's best to take all of the food in one plate. So don't take one plate and then come up and get seconds. Now, I tend to encourage people, if you're in a community where you're taking food and there's maybe not enough food for everybody, or it's not clear how much food is there, I think it's okay if you take a small amount to begin with, so you don't make sure people get their food and then come back to get more later, if because that way that you're not taking from others, as long as you have that intention. But you can decide what you want to do. The main point is not to just eat out of attachment, keep eating more and more. Just take what you need to sustain yourself. But as long as you finish the meal in the appropriate time. And also that there's certain foods we can't eat. We're not supposed to take what's called black foods or red foods like meat. So this means in the context of precepts and in Nyung Nä, not to take any kind of meat products or fish, not to take eggs, and then also not to take onions and garlic. And then also some other foods that I mentioned. One is radish, one is sesame. And I've noticed in this Nyung Nä book, I've never seen this before, but there's a footnote that mentions green peas. So I never heard of that, and I'm wondering, because the translation may have been from Tibetan, I'm not sure, but if you want to be really strict, then don't take green peas. But I'd never seen that before, and I don't think it's a huge issue. But the main point is that these foods are supposed to be like onion, especially onion, garlic, and radish, is that they excite the winds in the body, so it becomes a problem for meditation. And in the context of action tantra, which is Nyung Nä is an action tantra, one who's practicing action tantra shouldn't take those foods because it excites the winds and it obscures meditation. And it has to do with this sort of ritual cleanliness that was extant in ancient India. That in action tantra, an important aspect of the practice is being clean, and so it's considered that it pollutes the body. So we don't take those foods, and then we have this one meal before noon. And then after the afternoon, you cannot eat. You can still drink on the first day, and you can take drinks like juice. You cannot drink whole milk, but you can drink milk tea. The point is that you can have diluted milk as long as it's half milk and half water. And the same thing goes for the morning. You don't have breakfast, but you can have milk tea or juice in the morning. Some people like to take like vegetable broth in the evening, which is allowed. So you can decide what you want to do, or just decide not to take that and just have water in the evening. But you can continue drinking up until you go to bed on the first evening. So this is the strict way to do the practice, and this is how I do it. I'd encourage everyone to do that when I'm leading the retreat. But if you have some sort of medical issues, there can be some exceptions. So ideally, we stop drinking when we go to bed on the first evening. You're not going to drink again until the end of the session on the third morning, which is about 6:30 a.m. So say you go to bed at 9 p.m. It's close to 36 hours without water, which is okay. You won't die, don't worry. But as I say, I think I'd really encourage everyone to do that. If there's really some kind of medical reason, or if you're elderly or you feel that it's not possible, then one way to do it, you can drink the second morning, early morning, before we take the precepts. Some teachers allow that. And then you can break the fast, take drinking again on the third morning after the sun rises, before the session ends. So we're not going to do that here. You won't see any of us doing that. And as I say, it's ideal if you don't do that. But if it's really a medical issue, then of course you can do that. So then when you go to bed on the first evening, then you don't drink anything after that. Then we get up on the second morning of the Nyung Nä, and we take the precepts again. And we now are not drinking at all. We're talking. Of course, we recite the text. That's okay. We can recite any kind of prayers we do. That's okay, but not to talk, beyond that. Not to use your speech for any kind of communication with others. You can still text message, but I would encourage you not to do that unless it's urgent. If you need to communicate something to one of us or to somebody in your family, you can write something, but it's best not to be just having conversations or doing your work, whatever. And then, as I said, and until the third morning, and then at the end of the session on the third morning, we distribute the vase water here. So we can't give that to you, unfortunately. But you can visualize. We'll mention that at the time that you're taking the vase water and you've broken the fast, then you can start drinking again. So on the third morning, we again have taken the precepts for another day. So we're not supposed to take any food except at lunch. But within Nyung Nä, His Holiness the Seventh Dalai Lama, who composes practice, he says that you can take what he calls it thin gruel in the morning, which is generally the tradition, because you're very weak and if you haven't eaten in 2 days. So rather than waiting to lunch, you can have this very thin porridge. So usually we use oatmeal. We don't have any oatmeal here, so we're going to use tsampa. But the point is that you don't just have a big bowl of tsampa or oatmeal, that you just take very thin, almost like watery porridge in a small amount, and don't add anything to it. It's okay to add a little bit of raisin or some sugar if you like, or jaggery or something like that, but very minimal. What we do here, and this is again the strict way, and what I would encourage you all to do, is that don't do that until after we finish the session. So we do the first session on the third morning, and then we finish, and then we take this. But again, if for some medical reason, or if you're elderly and that's not possible, what you can do is take this after after the sun has risen, but before we take the precepts. It's a bit complicated. I think if someone really feels they need to do that, it's best that you write to us and we can explain more clearly how that's done. But especially it's important for those of you I mentioned in Singapore who are doing this practice. I would actually encourage you to do it that way, because otherwise we're not going to finish the session for you. It's a be 6:30 our time, so I guess that's going to be close to 10 o'clock your time. That's pretty late to be doing your first drink of the day after fasting for so long. So I would encourage you, when you get up in the morning to do the precepts, at whatever time that is, has to be just as the sun is rising. Just as the sun has started rising, and before you take the precepts, then take some water and take some gruel over to wheat porridge, and then take the precepts. Or you can also take after the precepts, as long as Dalai Lama says either way is okay. But the point is that you can do it earlier rather than, as long as the sun has risen, or at least you can see the rays of the sun, because then your precepts from the previous day, which included not eating or drinking, have now exhausted, so you can now take something. And then you can join us for the session, which I think is 8:30 your time, if I recall. So that's, as I said, a bit complicated, all these things about eating and drinking. And if you have questions about it at the end of this talk, if anything wasn't clear, then you can tell me. The next vow is not to use perfumes, garlands, or ornaments. So this means, obviously not to wear any kind of perfume, any kind of makeup, any like necklace or bracelets, rings, things like that, earrings. And then to avoid singing, dancing, and playing music. So again, we chant in the Nyung Nä, that's okay, but not to sing any kind of worldly songs, not to dance, not to play any kind of instrument. And as I said again, these are vows that novice monks and nuns take, but here we're approximating that. If we're lay people, we can take these for one day. So then it says here, just as the arhats have avoided wrong actions, such as taking the lives of others, so shall I avoid wrong actions, such as taking the lives of others. So we're trying to follow in the path of the great arhat, the followers of the Buddha who achieve liberation. After we've taken the vows, now when we take the vows, we're kneeling. I didn't mention that, but we prostrate before taking, and then we sit kneeling, and then we take the vows. Now we can sit down, and then we recite the mantra of pure morality. You'll see this here. Oma mogashila sambara bara bara. Mahashira sattva vibhushita buja dadada samanta avalokete humpe soha. I think there's a translation of it in the appendix. I won't go into it here, but if you're interested, you can read what the mantra means. So we recite that 21 times here, but I mentioned before, this is also useful in case you make any kind of mistake in the practice. So if, for example, on the non-speaking day, if you accidentally speak, or if you take a little water, or if you step on an insect or something like that, you can recite this. So if it's a minor thing, you recite it 21 times. So any of those things I just mentioned, I think that's okay. But if it's a major thing, so if you find, I intentionally I swatted a mosquito, which is you intentionally killed a living being, that's a fairly major breach of the precepts, then it's good if you can recite this 108 times. You can decide for yourself what you feel is appropriate. And if you do something that you feel is inappropriate, you don't know what to do, you can write to us and we can advise you what's the best thing. But the point is that you're doing something to purify that and to have, or especially to have the four opponent powers. You might know that repudiation, that what I did was wrong. I could see that it was a mistake. And then to have refuge. And then the remedy is the actual reciting the mantra, and then resolve not to do that again. That's of course important. I don't want to just the next minute do the same thing again, but I think I want to do as best I can, and not to do that again. So then you'll see there's a few prayers here that we finish taking the precepts. So that's only in the first session of the day. We don't obviously have to take the precepts every subsequent session. So then the next is the request of the lineage gurus. You'll see here, it's on the next page. But we don't recite here it's written in prose. So it's not chantable. So the chantable version, as you'll see, I wrote, it's in the appendix on page 179. So flip to that appendix for the chantable version. Actually, just as a side, the chantable version was composed by my aunt, Mary Colony, who has done a lot of Nyung Näs. So she helped put together this book, and it's very nice to hear her chanting it. She has a very nice voice. I can't chant it quite as well as she can, but I'll do my best for you, and we can learn it. But if you're able to, I don't know if it's possible to download. If you wanted to hear kind of an example of her chanting it, how it's done. You can also, I think, maybe try to find the nuns of Kopan chanting it in Tibetan. It's very beautiful. So it's a similar tune, but then we have it in English, so we can chant the same thing in English. So we do this prayer, and then we flip back to after we've done it in the appendix, then we flip back to the regular pages. So we go then to page 35, which is the start of the real practice here. So I should mention before I get into this, the Nyung Nä Sadhana is divided into 4 main parts. There's the preliminaries, and then there's the self-generation, and the front generation, and the concluding ritual. So what we're doing here is the preliminaries. And in the first session of each day, then the preliminaries are very extensive. So we've had all the Mahayana precepts and the chanting the lineage prayer, and then still we'll be doing more preliminaries that we'll get into. And then on the last session of each day, the concluding prayers are very extensive because it includes torma offerings and a lot of prayers, the dedication prayers. But just to make it, so you feel kind of clear about where you are and what we're doing, it's nice to be able to think about. We have these 4 parts. So that in the preliminaries, the main part is that we are inviting the merit field, the Nyung Nä merit field, which hopefully you can get a picture of that. It's also right here on the cover of the book. This is the Nyung Nä merit field, and I think you can get a picture if FNT, or we can send something out if you don't have something. And it's ideally if you can have a picture of that in front of where you're prostrating. If not, you can at least try to visualize it. Because the Nyung Nä merit field, you'll see, has Avalokiteshvara, 1,000-armed, in the center, surrounded by the lineage gurus, and then surrounded by offering goddesses and the protectors. And actually, it's also good to visualize all of the other deities of Action Tantra, which include like Tara, Medicine Buddha, Manjushri, Shakyamuni Buddha. So you'll see when we do the limb of prostrations, they're all mentioned. So as much as that is you could visualize, or you can put the pictures on your altar of these different deities of Action Tantra. Also, if you have a picture of the Lama Chupa merit field, you'll notice that all the Action Tantra deities that are common in Geluk are there. So if you have the Lama Chupa merit field, you see the bottom row is the Dharma protectors. Above that is the Dakinis. Above that is the heroes and heroines. Above that is the Arhats. Above that is the Pratyeka Buddhas. Above that is the Bodhisattvas. Above that is the Sutrayana Buddhas. And above that is the Action Tantra deities. I hope I didn't leave anything out and make you confused, but you should see there's a whole row of deities, one of them being 1,000-bound Avalokiteshvara, so you can identify. And you see there's a whole row of the Action Tantra deities there, so you can get an idea of who they are. If you ever are interested in knowing what the Lama Chupa merit field is, because it's not common to see you see the picture, but there's not an explanation of who they all are. The only place I've ever seen it is the book. You might know the book Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand by Babongko Rinpoche. There's another translation of that book called Liberation in Our Hands that was done by Geshe Tarchin and his student Art Engel in America. So you can get this book, Liberation in Our Hands. It's available from Mahayana Sutra and Tantra Press. And in the first volume, in the appendix, there's a guide to the merit field, and it has what every deity is. I've never seen that anywhere else, so it's good if you can get that, if you want to know what they are. But anyway, the point here is that when we invite the merit field, these are all the deities that we're then offering to. So we invite them, and then we perform the 7-limb prayer, which is very extensive here. It's a way of accumulating merit before we enter the actual practice of the visualizations. So we start by generating ourselves in the simple form of Avalokiteshvara, one facing 2 arms, called Padmapani, holder of the lotus. So this is on page 35 of the text, because that way, in order to have a appearance of ourselves as a deity, as opposed to ordinary appearance, we do that. And we only on the 31st day we bless the action vase. So this is for we're doing 3 Nyung Näs. It's only the very first day of the first Nyung Nä, first session. And when we do this, if you have an action vase, it's good. But if you don't, it's okay. We have one here. The action vase has a spout. You'll see there's different kinds of vases. And when you do the blessing, again, you don't have to do this, but if you want to do it, what you would do is put a very small vajra in the vase, in the top, and then have a 5-colored string attached to the vajra, which then you hold the end of the string at your heart. So you're imagining that the blessing is going to the vase. And then we recite this Padma Krit Humpe, which is the action mantra. And then, so we'd only do that at the beginning, the first day. Then we bless the offerings. So you'll see here, you recite the following action mantra, and visualize immeasurable wrathful Hayagrivas, 2 arms, 1 face, 2 arms. So Hayagriva is the wrathful aspect of Avalokiteshvara. So then we recite that, and we recite the action mantra, Padma Krit Humpe. So you'll see here, it explains the visualization. So you can read about it. I won't get into it because you can read it. But then you should know that every time we recite Padma Krit Humpe, anytime in the ritual, we do the same visualization, and we sprinkle the vase water if you have a vase. I'll explain this when we go through the altar tomorrow, but you'll have a fruit branch, branch of a fruit tree in the vase, and you use that to sprinkle the water. And then we go through taking refuge in bodhicitta. And after that, then we start the 7-limb prayer. So the 7 limbs, some of you might know, is prostration, and then offering, confession. So these are the first 3 we do very extensively. Then the last 4 of requesting the Buddhas to remain and to live long. Rejoicing, and then requesting to live long and to remain, and to teach the Dharma, and then dedicating. We just do 1 verse for all of those 4, so we do it quite condensed. So the main thing is the first 3 we do a lot. We do very extensively. The invocation of the merit field, we first do invite the merit field deities, and then we stand up and do prostration. So 3 times during the sadhana, we'll actually do prostrations. You'll see us all doing it here. So for that part, it's best if we can recite the prayer, but of course that would require having it memorized. So most of you probably won't have it memorized. So I'll recite it here, and you can just hear it and be doing prostrations wherever you are. If you do happen to have it memorized, that's great, and you can recite it. If for some reason you have any trouble hearing me, I think you can also download a recording of it, but it's best since we're doing it together, to try to listen to the chant master doing it if you can hear me clearly. And I'll recite it, as I mentioned in the guide here. I'll recite it again. We can do it. There's a chantable version in English, so that's in the appendix on page 181 of the appendix. So if you want to learn that, don't learn the version that's here on page 38, which is the prose version, because that's not what we'll be chanting. Learn the chantable version, which is on page 181. So for that, as I mentioned, we then recite the names of the different Buddhas of Action Tantra and other lineage lamas and so forth. You can read through it. It doesn't take very long. It takes between 5 and 10 minutes, depending on how fast we go. Then the next limb is the limb of offering. So this is on page 47. Oh, sorry, 46. So this is important because you might get lost. You know, you stand up to prostrate and you sit back down, and all of a sudden I'm doing the limb of offering. So make sure you're aware, and based on the guide that we made. The limb of offering is on page 46, because on the non-speaking day I won't be able to say that. So for that we do the offering mantras with the different aragam, padyam, the different offering substances to the merit field, and then we do a mandala offering. So sometimes we'll do the extensive mandala offering if we have time, but oftentimes we won't. We'll just do the short one, like in the first session of the day, because it's already a very long session. So just be aware of that. You might skip from page 47 directly to page 48 and do the short mandala offering. And then we do the limb of confession on page 49. So again, we prostrate. We start by reciting this one verse, whatever evil I have done, you see. We recite that together before we prostrate. And then we stand up and do prostrations. Well, actually, we'll recite, before we stand up, we can recite these mantras. There's some mantras to enhance the prostration. We can do that together before we get up. But then after reciting the mantras, then we stand. So again, if you haven't memorized, it's great. You can recite it. If not, you can listen to me reciting it. And I'll recite it in English because most of you don't know Tibetan, so we can all understand the meaning. And then the prostration to the 7 medicine Buddhas. If you'd like to learn more about the visualization associated with the 35 Buddha confession, there's the FPMT book. I think was it Bodhi's? What's it called? The Confession of Downfalls or something like that. The prostration to 35 Buddhas. I forget the name of the FPMT guide, but you can find it on their website pretty easily, I think. And then there's the confession prayer at the end of that. So ideally, we would recite the confession prayer while prostrating, but I won't do that because I want everyone to be able to recite it together. So we'll sit for that. We'll kneel, actually, and recite on page 56. This is the confession prayer. So we'll do that at every session. Then there's the general confession, which we'll do if we have time, but we don't have to do that. So some sessions we'll do that, some not. That's on page, the English is on page 58. So just be aware we might skip that and go straight to page 59, which is to complete the 7-limb offering. So then we just do the last 4, rejoicing, the 2 requesting, and the dedication. We just do 1 verse each. And we'll probably do it in English. There is a way to chant the Tibetan, but we probably won't do that unless we have extra time, because it just takes time. So for these, just be aware, and I'm thinking about the meaning, but we don't take a lot of time for them. And then we take the Dharani of Immaculate Morality again, that we did at the precepts. And you'll see a few more prayers, and then the departure of the merit field. So now imagine that the merit field that we visualized, the deities return to their own abodes, meaning that they go back to, in this case, the Pure Land, or dissolve into emptiness. Or we can also imagine that there's different ways we say they return to their own abodes. It's understood in many different ways. But mainly just imagine that they dissolve into light and return to the Pure Land. So then now we've completed the first section. We've completed the preliminaries. So now it says, you see on page 62, the actual ritual. So now we'll do first the self generation and the front generation. So here it's really become the action tantra practice. Before it was more sort of shared with sutra, like in sutra, so do prostrations and like merit, but here we're actually engaging in the practice of action tantra. So in the practice of action tantra, generally speaking, So some of you might know about in highest yoga tantra, if you have an empowerment with the generation stage and the completion stage that I mentioned yesterday. So in action tantra, it's similar that there's what's called the yoga with signs and the yoga without signs. So these are the two stages of action tantra. So what we're doing here is the yoga with signs. There's different ways to understand it, but oftentimes it's understood that when you haven't actually had a realization of emptiness, then what you're doing is the yoga with signs. Once you've had the realization of emptiness, then it's the yoga without signs. So if most of us, I'm assuming, unless some of you are quite extraordinary, haven't realized emptiness, we're doing the yoga with signs. And then within the yoga with signs is what's called the 6 deities. So again, like if you know about in highest yoga tantra, you have the 5 stages of tantra. So similarly in action tantra, we have the 6 deities, which is sort of 6 meditations that we do. The ultimate deity, the deity of sound, the deity of syllables, the deity of form, the deity of mudra, and the deity of sign. So we go through these when we do the self-generation. So any action tantra practice you do, you would do these 6 deities. And so we do first, as I said, the self-generation, and later we'll do the front generation. So when we do the self-generation, means we dissolve into emptiness and then imagine ourselves as a deity. Now, if you haven't had the empowerment, I'm hoping most of you have, because hopefully you'll have taken it tomorrow if you haven't taken it before. But if you haven't had the empowerment, then you would not visualize yourself as a deity. You would visualize the deity at your crown. But if you have had the empowerment, then we arise as a deity. Now, again, if any of you have done highest yoga tantra practice, you'll know that we visualize the 3 bodies, taking 3 bodies in the path. That's part of highest yoga tantra, but that's not actually part of action tantra. So don't do that here. You don't visualize first the clear light and then the seed syllable and then the deity. You just spontaneously appear as the deity out of emptiness. So in the deity here, being Avalokiteshvara, of course, but here we start with the ultimate deity, which is and meditating on emptiness. So we'll pause in the sadhana for a little bit just to meditate on emptiness as best as possible. It said just try to meditate on space like emptiness. Imagine the appearance of space. And if you can use some kind of reasoning that helps you, that's good. But if not, just try to meditate on spaciousness. And then we have the deity of sound. So in this case, we imagine that the sound of the mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, manifests in space. It pervades the realm of space. So imagine that we can hear this sound resounding in the space. And then the deity is syllables, which means that then that sound then takes the form of the mantra, as you'll see here on the moon mandala. So there's symbolism here that there's the emptiness, which is the ultimate bodhicitta, the ultimate realization of emptiness. And then the syllables are conventional bodhicitta, or an aspiration to attain enlightenment. And then I won't, within the context of all the visualizations, I'm not going to describe them in a lot of detail because I don't have a lot of time, but you can read here in the sadhana. And then if you have questions about details later, maybe you can ask them. And then we have the 4th is the deity of form. So then here we transform into Avalokiteshvara. So this is quite extensive. We do all of these visualizations, all these details. And as I said before, don't worry if it's very hard. This is very hard to do. And so the main thing is to have a kind of sense of faith that this is who I am. We say that we have to let go of our ordinary concepts of who I am. There's some deeper level of me that's it's not inherently existent. It's not like this is the true me, the inherently existent I, but it says that this is closer to who I really am. It's still an approximation, but it's closer to who I really am than this ordinary conception of myself as a limited person who exists in time and space in a very limited way. So have a sense of this is who I am, and then as much as possible, the clear appearance of this. So it said that if we can't have all the details, because when we get to this part, I'll read through this. At this point, a lot of the sadhana we're chanting together, but here, it's best you can just listen to me recite, and as best as possible as you hear each detail, then try to just imagine that, and don't worry too much if it doesn't appear clearly. Now, depending on the time, how much time we have. Well, also I'll mention that you can look at a picture of Avalokiteshvara. It's very helpful, of course, so you get an idea of how all are supposed to appear to your mind. So if you have this picture, but then when we get to the end of this section, if we have time in the sadhana, if it's not in a hurry, so oftentimes like in the afternoon session we'll have more time, then I'll pause and give you a chance to then stabilize this appearance to your mind. Now, if it's hard, and it of course is going to be hard at the beginning, it might be easier just to focus on one detail. So try to, especially, for example, have the detail of the face, the main face, because we have 11 faces here. But in the main white face, just try to picture that, have it appear to your mind as clearly as possible. And then as you go on, if you're able to start building all the different details in your mind during this short time when I pause, and to have that appear clearly, without having your mind be distracted. So it's better if trying to visualize all these things causes you to start having all kinds of thoughts and your mind goes away, then better just to focus on one detail. But if it's possible that you can keep your mind in a relatively stable state, then to start building these details, and especially to have the sense that this is luminous and in the nature of bliss and compassion. This is rather than just a static mental image. So then we can move on to the deity of mudra, which means that we're then blessing the places of the body. So we again use the lotus mudra that we did at the beginning of the session, with your thumbs tucked in, and then we recite the mantra 5 times and touch the different parts of your body. So you touch your heart, and then forehead, and then your throat, and then each shoulder. First your right shoulder. I don't know if it's reversed here, but you'll see it's your right shoulder and then your left shoulder. So touching those 5 places with the mudra and with the mantra. That's the deity of mudra. And then the deity of sign is that we invoke the wisdom beings to dissolve into us, and then the empowering beings to bestow the empowerment. The empowering beings are the deities of 5 Buddha families. So I mentioned yesterday that this is a part of the ritual. So you can maybe get a picture of those, and with Amitabha as the principal, because this is the lotus family of Amitabha. So you can imagine inviting those, and you'll see we do Om Panchakula Saparivara. So Om Panchakula, the 5 families. So then making offerings to the 5 Buddha families. And again, if in some sessions we'll just do that very quickly. I'll say Panchakula, Aragam, Bhadyam, Pushpe, Tupe. But if we have time, we'll do them each individually. So Panchakula Saparivara, Aragam, Bhadyam, and then another one, Pushpe, so forth. Because this is, you'll see if we have the Nyung Nä altar, we have offerings set up to each of the 5 deities. You'll see we have 7 sets of offerings in the Nyung Nä altar. So we have 1 for each of the 5 Buddha families, and then 1 for the front generation, 1 for the self generation. So I always like, if we have time, to try to focus on this, because we set up all these offerings and we just rush through it. It's not very nice. So we're having this opportunity to offer to the 5 Buddha families. And again, as I mentioned, tomorrow when His Holiness bestows the empowerment, we'll be empowered. There's one empowerment for each of the 5 families. So we invite them, and then we imagine that they bestow empowerment upon us as Avalokiteshvara. And then we have the mantra recitation. You'll see on the next page. Oh, sorry, there's first the offerings. So yeah, the offerings, again, we can do extensively or condensed. So it depends on the time. But usually just keep going through the text here. And then we finally get to page 70 is the mantra recitation. I did also just mention in terms of the offerings. So we're offering to ourselves the deity. This is something that some Kappa actually said was very important. That previously in Tibet, there was a thought that when we do the self-generation, especially in action tantra, that you don't offer to yourself. But Tsongkhapa said that his understanding of reading the Indian tantras was that you should do that. It's that you're offering to yourself, me now, like I get greedy for having these offerings, but it's to the Buddha that you will become in the future, that this is the potential you have. So you want to make offerings to this Buddha, which you eventually will actualize. So then we come to the mantra recitation, and you'll see the visualization here. So I don't have to describe it, you can read about it. And we recite the long dharani once, and then we recite the essence mantra 107 times. So it's best if you can do that. I'll recite it. So when I finish 107, then we finish. So I'll say, if you might have gotten to 107, that's okay, as long as the chant master has completed the recitation. But if it's too hard for you to recite if it's becoming tedious to recite all that, you can just recite Mani Padme Hum. But then if possible, try to recite it, because if you keep doing it, it will become more natural, and you can recite the longer one. And then you recite the purification mantra. You'll see it Padmasattva. So some of you might know Vajrasattva mantra. So in Padmasattva is just because this is the lotus family, not the Vajra family. So we recite the Padmasattva purification mantra. That's associated with that. So now we've completed the second part of the ritual, the self-generation, and now we do the front generation. So this is again part of Action Tantra, Tsongkhapa's presentation of Action Tantra, that we first generate ourselves and do practice, then we generate the same deity in the front. We still have the appearance of ourselves as the deity. We haven't let go of that. But then you'll see that the syllable Brum comes from your heart and goes to the space in front, and then generates the celestial mansion with the deity. And it says just here the celestial mansion. It doesn't go into any more detail than that. But there's a lot of it's quite elaborate, the celestial mansion, and how to do that. If you really wanted to, we're not going to go through each detail of it here, but if you ever have the chance and want to learn about all the details of the celestial mansion, I think, in some books on explanations, I haven't seen any really clear explanations of Nyung Nä in English that go through all the details. But for any action tantra practice, it's the same visualization of the mansion. So if you're able to obtain that in another action tantra practice, then maybe you can learn about all of these various details if you really like to visualize things. But what, as I said here, we just mentioned here, so it's like a square mansion with the center of the throne. Where if you look at actually the picture of the mandala, if someone can carry it, it's over there. That kind of is a two-dimensional picture of the mansion, how it's supposed to look, so you can get a general idea. But you'll need more explanation to kind of understand all the walls and everything, because you can't draw that in a two-dimensional picture. So yeah, we have this here. So this is kind of how it generally looks. You see that we have the center, we have the lotus, 8-petal lotus. In the center of that, the hub, is where Avalokiteshvara. And in the 4 cardinal directions we have in the Buddha families. So in the east is Akshobhya, in the south is Ratnasambhava, in the west is Vajrachana, and in the north is Amoghasiddhi. Amitabha is on Avalokiteshvara's crown, so he's in the center. So usually you might have Amitabha in the west. You might have seen that. But that's when Akshobhya in the center. But that's because a lot of deities are a part of the Vajra, Akshobhya family. But here, because Amitabha is principal, then Amitabha is in the center. So there's some variation on that. So if you're able to visualize all of those details, you see that the south with the color yellow. This is Ratnasambhava. So I don't know if it's appearing backwards on your screen. It's appearing like I'm in a mirror here, but actually, so we have the south and then we have the east here. Akshobhya, the black or blue. And then north of Mocha City is green, and the west of Adarchana is white. If you're visualizing this in front of you, what you want to visualize is that the east is with Amitabh Akshobhya is facing you. So you're facing, because Bhakteshvara is in the center facing towards the east. So he's facing you. So you're facing him from the east, like so it's sort of like this, flat, and you're here. And you visualize that in front of you. And as I say, you can see all these various details, which hopefully you can, if I'm able to find and locate any kind of explanation of it, I can send it to you. But I haven't seen a lot on that. Maybe in the future we can get. You see it's surrounded by the 5 colored light rays, at the edges, all these details. So then we visualize this, and then the visualization after that is the same as for the self generation, except it's in front of you, the front generation. So a lot of this will seem repetitive. But then we get to the end of the visualization. Now I'm on page 75 I've gotten to. So now we don't do all the deities. We did all the 6 deities of the ultimate deity, the deity of sound and syllable, and the deity of form, the deity of mudra, the deity of sign. That's not part of the front generation. So we just go to the invocation here. So then we kneel and do the invocation mudra that I showed earlier. I'll show again tomorrow. And then we invite the deity to come. If you have incense where you are, it's good to light incense as an invocation. But if you don't, we're doing it here, so don't worry. And then we do the Zahum Bam Ho. Again, I'll show tomorrow. This is the mudra that we can do. It's very quick here, but tomorrow I'll do it more clearly what we're doing. And then empowerment. Again, we invite the 5 deities, the 5 Buddha families, to bestow empowerment upon the deity in front of us, front generation. And then we do the offerings. So you'll see here on page 77, we bless the offerings. And then on page 78, we present the offerings. Now this is extensive presentation. So we won't do that a lot of it. Sometimes we'll do that, but oftentimes we'll skip it depending on the time. And we'll just do each verse. So you see, Arya Avalukhtishvara Sapari Vara Argam Partitaham Soha. So if we do it the condensed way, we just do those verses and skip the verses. We just do that, sorry, the one line in Sanskrit, but we skip the 4-line verse. But if we have more time, we'll chant the 4-line verses. It's chantable in Tibetan, and also it's chantable in English on in the appendix. Let's see. On page 186 of the appendix. I tried translating it in English once, and I found it a little awkward. So maybe we'll just do it in Tibetan most of the time, but you can read the meaning right there. You'll understand what's going on, and it's very repetitive. Each verse is exactly the same, except for that it switches water or flowers or whatever, so you can get the meaning. But maybe, if we have a chance, if people like, at some point, if you find it difficult in Tibetan and you want to try it in English, maybe tell me at some point, we can try it one session in English in the appendix. I'll have to mention that. But generally speaking, you see it here in we'll do the offering verses or just the mantras. And offering the divine garments, you'll see on page 82, offering the ornaments, page 83, and then offering the mandala on page 84. So again, the extensive mandala we'll do if we have time. If not, we just do the short mandala on page 85. And then on page 86 is the praise, and then 87 the mantra. So you'll see, you can read this, but the visualization is different here. And with the self-generation, we visualize the mantra at our heart and the light rays going out. You can read about that. But here we visualize that the visualization is that the light rays stream from our fingers, both of our fingers as self-generation and from the front generation, and bless the vase water. So we have two vases here. We have the action vase, which you'll see I'll have on my table in front of me, which is with a spout coming out. And then there's the victory vase, which is on the main altar. We'll show it tomorrow, which doesn't have a spout. And that's what we're blessing, that water. And then later we'll pour the water from the vase, victory vase into the action vase, just a little bit. And then distribute that blessed water to everybody, or at home you can visualize, or if you have your own, you can use that. So the visualization here is to bless the action of the victory vase water. And then we do the mantra. So this time we don't do the essence mantra, we actually do the long mantra. You see, the long dharani. So again, this is quite extensive mantra, and it might be hard. So if you can do it, it's best. But if not, you can just recite the Om Mani Padme Hum, or you can also recite the essence mantra that we were doing earlier, which is just the latter part of this mantra. Om Dare Dare Diri Diri Duru, you'll see at the end. And when I completed with it, we'll all finish. So if you're able to recite it faster than me, then you can do more than the requisite amount. But otherwise, when I get to completing a mala, then we'll finish. And then we do the Padmasad, the purification. And then you see the absorption of the exalted wisdom beings. Because now we're going to do more prostrations. This is the longest part of prostration within the sadhana. So we then imagine that the wisdom beings which we dissolved into ourselves during the self-generation now absorbed into the space in front, so we're prostrate into them, into the front generation. So before we stand, you see here, then we visualize Vikshini Lakshmi and Kara Vikshini Lakshmi on our heads, who's then supplicating on our behalf. And then we're supposed to stand up and make prostration. But before we do that, we'll recite the prostration verse in Tibetan once, because it's very beautiful to chant it. And so it's better we remain seated so everyone can chant it together. And then we'll stand and recite in English. I'll recite it in English while we're prostrating. If you haven't memorized in any language, you can do that. But I'll recite it in English so you can understand what the meaning is. If at any point we're really in a rush, I might recite it in Tibetan just because we can do that faster. I can do that faster, but I think generally I'll try to do it in English. You know what I'm reciting. As also, you'll see in the appendix, there's a chantable English version, but I don't know how to chant it. It's a bit funny because it says chantable, but it doesn't appear to actually be in verse as far as I can tell. And so I mentioned that my aunt had most of the chantable English in this text was written by my aunt. But I asked her about this, and she said, "Oh, I didn't know there was a chantable English version of the Praise to Avalokiteshvara. So somebody else must have written it. I don't know." And then I asked other people, and they said, "Oh yeah, your aunt wrote it. You should ask her about it." She obviously didn't write it because she didn't know it existed. So I don't know how to chant it. So we can't chant it in English, but we'll chant it in Tibetan, as I said, one time, and then we'll just do the prostration. So we recite it 21 times and prostrate. So this takes a while. I think if I do it in Tibetan, it takes about 20 minutes. In English, it might take me closer to half an hour. So we're prostrating the whole time. Now, as we're prostrating, if you can do all the full visualization and prostrate, that's perfect, but that's very hard. So the main thing is try to, as much as possible, just have faith that we're prostrating to Avalokiteshvara, and you have an image, of course, that's makes it easier. So you can prostrate to that. And the merit field as well, all the deities, but mainly the front generation of Avalokiteshvara, which we visualized in front of us. And of course, the praise goes through all the details of the holy body, so it helps us to recollect that. That's why I say it's good that I do it in English, so we can know about all these details. Now, again, when we're prostrating, as it takes a while, it could take up to half an hour. That might be hard for some of you, especially on the fasting day when you haven't had any water for 24 hours, or especially the last morning is the hardest. So if you can, keep prostrating, even if you have to go slowly. Even if sometimes you'll see people in Nyung Nä, they kind of go down one hand at a time and walk themselves forward and put their head on the ground and slowly come up and come back. That's okay. But if it's really at the point where you feel that you can't keep prostrating, it's okay. You can either stand and just make prostrations with your hands. But it's important. Don't stay on the ground. It's considered inconsiderate or considered disrespectful if during the prostrations you're just lying there flat on the ground. So try to at least stand up, and if you really need to, you can go to your seat. If you really are at a point where you feel that I'm so tired, like on the last morning especially, and thirsty, that I need to lie down, that's okay. But don't lie down on the prostration seat. Go back to your cushion where you're sitting in meditation. And if you're at that point where you really can't continue with the prostrations or anything else, at least you're still participating. Still recite Om Mani Padme Hum if you can. So you're still generating some merit, keeping a virtuous mind, and participating with us. And at some point you're able to come back to the prostrations. That's good. But if you can't, don't force yourself. That's okay. Now I mentioned the last morning, so the third morning of the Nyung Nä, which is the first morning of the second Nyung Nä for those of us doing multiple Nyung Nãs. That's of course the hardest time because we haven't had any water for 36 hours. But fortunately, then we do things a little abbreviated. So I mentioned we just did the long mantra, one mala, but the last morning I'll only do it 21 times. So we'll go quickly to that. And then we only do the praise 7 times rather than 21 times. So we get through it quickly. So don't worry if you're anxious to get water. We'll be getting it soon. And that's also why the last morning the session doesn't take as long. If we're starting at 4 a.m., the very first day it'll probably go till 8 o'clock almost because of all these details we have to go through. I'll try to go a little faster so we're not going on and on and on. But then the subsequent days, or at least on the third day, we start at 4. We'll hopefully finish by 6:30 or so. So then we complete the prostrations, and now we've completed the third part of the ritual. I mentioned there was the preliminaries, and then the self-generation and the front generation we've completed. Now we go to the concluding ritual. So in the first 2 sessions of the day, this is pretty short, so we're almost done. In the third session of the day, it'll be quite a bit longer, and I'll explain that. So the first 2 sessions of the day, we come to this concluding ritual on page 92, with the requesting prayer. So don't sit down yet, because now you come back from prostrating, and now you come back and kneel. You recite this prayer to Avalokiteshvara, which was this I should have mentioned before, this praise to Avalokiteshvara that we recite while prostrating is the one I mentioned yesterday. It was actually composed by Bhikshuni Lakshmi herself. I assume in Sanskrit originally, but now we have it in Tibetan or any other language. Now this requesting prayer to Avalokiteshvara was composed by the 7th Dalai Lama, who composed this practice. So we kneel and request, and we can recite this. This one is chantable in English. So it says page 188. So be aware of that. We'll be reciting the prayer on 188, as opposed to this one on page 92. So be sort of flip to that chantable version in English. And then we come back to page 93. But actually, this is page 93 is the tormas. So we don't do that in the first session. So be sure you're not getting lost by everything that's going on. And I have the guide that I sent to you. So it should be clear where we're going. So in the first and second session of the day, we then go straight to page 106. which is the offering of ablution, offering a bath. So we skip all of the in-between things. But don't go to that now, because I'll explain. In the last session of the day, we do the tormas. So you'll see that here. So I'll just explain that in terms of the order it's in the book. With the torma offering, we have 3 torma offerings. We have to the main deity, which is Avalokitesvara. It's the large torma. We don't have it here yet, but we'll have it tomorrow, I hope. And we're fortunate here at Martika, we have some very qualified Nyingma monks who are very good at making tormas. So they're going to make us an actual torma of Avalokitesvara, which will hopefully be very beautiful, you can see. But at home also, if you'd like to have a torma, you can. If you can't make a torma in the traditional way, which is very hard to do, you can just offer something very nice, like cake or muesli is very common. This sort of the nicest food offering on your altar should be your torma offering, because this is the special offering for the deity. And it's best, obviously it shouldn't have any meat in it, but it should, if possible, have the 3 whites and 3 sweets, we say, which are the common substances of the Action Tantra. So meaning it should have 3 whites being milk, curd or yogurt, and butter or ghee, okay? Even just a little bit, you can just, if the food doesn't naturally have it in it, just like the drop of those as a symbolic thing. And the 3 sweets of sugar, honey, and then the third is, in Tibetan, is buram, which is kind of like molasses. But most places it's hard to get molasses, so you can also use jaggery or brown sugar is okay. Some kind of dark sweet thing. That's the main point, it seems here. So the torma contains those. So you have the torma, first we make torma offering to Avalokitesvara, you'll see here. Then we have the torma to the protectors, which is the most extensive, because we don't only make the torma offering, we also make praises to the protector deities. And in the practice of Nyung Nä, the main protector deities are 6-armed Mahakala, Peldanalhamo, and Kalarupa. And also we have the protector deity here of 4-faced Mahakala. I think that's in here because this is the main protector deity that Lama Zopa Rinpoche has recommended for FPMT. And then also to Vaishravana, another one that I think Lama Zopa Rinpoche added because he considers this important. So we'll see how much time we have each day. If we don't have a lot of time, then we'll only do the praises to 6-armed Mahakala and Palden Lama. I do these because His Holiness Dalai Lama recommends these especially. And because, as I said, if you'll see in the Nyung Nä merit field, they're there. And because also the chanting is very nice. We'll chant both of those in Tibetan because it's not chantable in English. But if we do have time and we do the 4-faced Mahakala, we'll chant that in English because it can be done. It's actually composed by Lama Yeshe along with one of his students, this chantable 4-faced Mahakala. So you see here, this is the Nyung Nä merit field, and here's 6-armed Mahakala, and here is Peldan Lhamo, and here is Kalarupa. So we'll do, if we have time, we'll do also the Kalarupa praise, which we can't chant. Even in Tibetan, it's just recited very fast, so there's no need for us to do that in Tibetan. We'll do it in English if we do it. And we'll probably recite Vaishravana because it's so short anyway. There's a picture actually. Don't worry about it. Somewhere in there's a picture of Vaishravana. I think on the left side. The different, I'll find it. The different protector deities that Lama Zopa Rinpoche feels have a good connection with FPMT. This is Vaishravana here. So we'll have this on the altar. So mainly we're praying that the deities, His Holiness, you might have seen this morning, you're saying he doesn't do the Gektor anymore, the offering to the spirit, to the harmful spirits, to get them to go away. Because it's a bit of a I don't know how they translated it in English, but he said it's like interpretable and definitive meaning, which for us studying Tibetan, we know it's quite a nice joke that he made. It's like the definitive meaning is what the Buddha really meant when he talked. The interpretable is some sutras he didn't say something he said something that wasn't meant to be taken literally. So, like, when the Buddha said to the king, you might know this story of how there was King Adisatru who had murdered his father, King Bimbisara, and Bimbisara was a disciple of the Buddha, and later Adisatru had great regret that he'd killed his father. So the Buddha very skillfully, the first thing he said to him when he came to the Buddha and overheard him teaching, he said, "You should kill your father and mother." So obviously the Buddha didn't mean this to be taken literally, but it had some effect on Adisatru's mind because he was in such torment about all the regret he felt that he felt some relief that the Buddha was saying it's okay to do that. And later the Buddha described what this means is that you should kill craving and karma, which are the two causes of samsara. These are your parents because these are what caused you to be born in samsara. So that was the definitive meaning. So the joke His Holiness was making was that we say, practice compassion. Then we say, get out of here, all you protectors. We use wrathful means to expel you. Then you might have some doubt that when the Buddha says practice compassion, actually the real meaning is that only practice compassion for some people, but get rid of harm the protectors. But he's not actually meaning this literally when he says practice compassion. So the point is that that's not true. The Buddha obviously, when he says practice compassion for all beings, he means it. So His Holiness says he doesn't like to do this offering to the protectors anymore. He likes not protectors, the offering to the harmful spirits, because then it's implying that you're saying some beings we invite as our guests, some beings we expel from the area because they're getting in our way. So he says it's better we just invite all beings as our guests. But this year we're not doing this. That's a little different because that's the Gektor. It's called at the beginning of an empowerment. It's like offering it's actually like a ransom or a ruse. I forget the word in English. We say lu in Tibetan. It's like you're tricking them. You offer this thing and you get rid of them because they follow the offering. So when we're offering to the protectors, it's a little different. It's that we're praying that the protectors might guard our minds, that we're in retreat, and to prevent harmful thoughts from coming into our mind that will disturb our retreat. At one level we can understand it. We're praying that our retreat might not be harmed by external forces, that we don't get interruptions to our retreat. But the main thing is that we're praying that our mind might stay in retreat and not get so distracted to all kinds of things that we can no longer focus on the retreat. So we do this at the end of the day, each day. I do these prayers to the protectors. And then at the end of that, we do the Tormor offering to the protectors. And then we do the Tormor offering to the local Dakas and Dakinis, local deities, because it's an understanding that wherever we are, there are certain beings around us, who might inhabit that area, and so that they might, feel they might welcome us. We just make a token offering to them. So those are the three main Tormor offerings. In the center, you'll see the large Tormor offering is to Chenrezig, and then the two flanking ones on the two sides are to the two. The one is to the Dharma protectors, and one is to the local deities. So I'll show that tomorrow when we have them on the altar. I can show that to you. And then we do the offering of the bath. So I mentioned, except for the last session of the day, every other session we'd go straight to this part on page 106. So we'll have here, if you'd like to do it at home, you can, but you don't have to. You'll see that I'll have a crystal bowl, or at least a glass bowl, with a mirror. So then I draw an image on the mirror with water, using the branch of the tree. You can see this in the appendix if you want to learn how to do this. It's described in the appendix of the book. And then we put 5 sections with 5 dots symbolizing the 5 Buddha families. And then we have the mirror. So we imagine that the deities, like the reflection of the deities, we're then offering them the bath. And you can do that very elaborately if you like, the offering of the bath. I think in Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, The Abiding in the Retreat, the commentary on Nyung Nä, he goes very extensively into that if you're interested. But mainly you can go, as we go through it, you'll see first offering to Avalokiteshvara and then to the gurus and idams and so forth. There's different stages, different things we're offering to. So this is a common practice in Action Tantra. As I mentioned, cleanliness is very important in Action Tantra. So this is ultimately cleaning our affliction. If we visualize this well, it's helping to clean away the sort of pollution in our minds. And then we come to page 110 is the request and dedication. So we're finished with the sadhana here and requesting forgiveness. And then on page 112, we have taking the ablution, taking the vase nectar. So at this point, here we're going to distribute the water from the vase. And if you're at home, you can just either have your own vase or just visualize that you're taking this water. So on the non-fasting day, on the first day, third day, for example, then we drink a little bit of the water. And you'll see here it describes what you visualize. So I won't tell you about that. You can read about it. But on the fasting day, you don't drink the water because you're not drinking. So then you just take a little bit and wash yourself with it 3 times. And you can also imagine washing your forehead, crown, and heart if you like. And then use because it's considered blessed water, and just pour it out, whatever is left in your hand, then you use to wash yourself. And then we dissolve the visualization. So we visualized ourselves as this 1,000-armed Chenrezig. It all dissolves into the commitment being, which is 2-armed. If you like, you can maintain the pride of yourself with all the arms, but that's very hard. So ideally, what you can just do is visualize yourself now as a 2-armed Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara, and try as much as you can to maintain that even during the break periods from the sessions. And then you'll notice again, if you've done any highest yoga tantra practice, you dissolve into the clear light. We don't do that here. Just keep that in mind. We just dissolve into the simple swarm of the deity. Then on page 114, you'll see the requesting to reside or depart. We don't do that in the last session of the last day, the last morning, the 7th day. Unless I wanted to mention, if any of you are doing only the first Nyung Nä, or only the second Nyung Nä, or only the first 2, and not the third, then let me know, because you'll have to finish the Nyung Nä on your own. Because we're all going to finish it the last day on the 7th day, on the June 6th. So you'll need to finish it earlier, and if you need to do that, tell me, and I can tell you separately how to do that. Okay, that's a little different. And then on the last session of the day, we go to page 116. We read this prayer of abiding in the retreat, which is very useful to reflect on because we think about how all the different sufferings we're experiencing from hunger and thirst and so forth become part of our practice. And then we recite on page 118 the auspiciousness verses. And then we're finished with the sadhana. So either we've finished earlier, because on the first and second session we finished a few pages earlier, or in the last session we finished here. But in any case, we finish with the sadhana, but then we do some dedication prayers. So you'll see I put in the schedule that was sent out what dedication prayers we're doing. So we're going to try to make that as standard as possible so that it's clear for you. I could change it every session, but then I'd have to tell you what I'm doing. Because if I can't talk, I can't do that. So it's better we just keep it standard. We'll do some set of prayers the first session, some set of prayers the second session, some set of prayers the third session. And you should have that separately. Like with the King of Prayers, for example, the last session, you'll have a book or the email that was sent out with that. We can do those together and then complete the session. On the days when we can talk, then if people have dedications they'd like me to make, on the last session we can read out some names, but I won't do that on the non-talking day. But on every subsequent day, I can read those out. Okay, so now we've completed the explanation. It's been quite long. So if we have a few questions, I said there are already some that came up on the screen. Yeah. Oh yeah. We were going to mention also that Rinpoche made a video of the Mahayana precepts. What this means is that he also, for one thing, he gave an explanation of the value of them, but he also gave the precepts. So you can take that if you like. It would be good to do, because you can take the precepts in a group. It's okay with us together, but also it's good if the first time you take them from a teacher. And so you can take them from Rinpoche. He said it's okay to watch the recording and do that. We can't do that as part of our Nyung Nä session because he took a long time with it, and we don't have that much time. So if you want, tomorrow morning, you can do that with him. You can watch that recording, and then you get the transmission of the precepts. And then, on subsequent mornings, we'll do it here together, just in a shortened form. So that's one thing to mention.
Two questions about counting.
Yeah.
The second question is about the person wants to just one.
Yeah, so one question about counting malas. So no, we're not counting malas. I mentioned I will complete the mantra count, and that's all. And then everyone else will just move on with the sadhana. If you can complete it faster than me, then you can finish the mala. But and generally speaking, you're not accumulating a number. When you do Nyung Nä retreat, that's not part of the retreat. To complete a Nyung Nä, you have to complete a certain number of malas, a certain number of mantras each session. And as long as the chant master does that, it's okay for everyone. If you're on your own, you have to do that number. But you're not kind of trying to complete like 100,000 of whatever mantra. If you did a retreat of Avalokiteshvara, approximation retreat, then you would do that. That's different. But in the Nyung Nä, it's just a matter of the number per session, and you complete one Nyung Nä. Someone asked if they want to do just one Nyung Nä, it's best to do the last. Yes, for two reasons. One is because, as I said, you'll then complete it with us, and then on the last morning, we'll all be completing it together and do all the dedications together. Also, it's good because the last Nyung Nä, the second day, the fasting day, is June 5th, which is the anniversary of the Buddha's enlightenment, which is the major Buddhist holiday. And actually, the Khalsen Gache, the seventh Dalai Lama, he said that if it's your first Nyung Nä, it's best to do it then. So for all those reasons, it's best to do the last Nyung Nä only if you're only doing one. But if you can't, if you only have time during the first or second, that's okay. But then, as I said, you'll have to get in touch with us so I can explain to you how to complete the Nyung Nä on your own. Okay. Are there any other questions here or on the line? No. Okay. So tomorrow, I think we're going to have the session at 4 p.m. Indian time, because that way you can get some sleep. Somebody has said they've not received any schedule or list of supplementary prayers. So maybe if CKSL can send that out to you, or if not, we'll get someone here to send it out to you. Okay. So tomorrow, so that we'll have the session at 4, and then if you're doing your altar setup there, you can do that. You don't have to, as I said, but if you're doing that, and then you might want to go to bed early because we'll be starting at 4 a.m. Indian time on Sunday morning. And so tomorrow at 4, the session will be, as I said, we'll do the mudras. I'll show you the altar, which will hopefully be set up here by then. And I'll just go through what's on the altar and any other last minute details. And any other questions people have. Something that just came to my mind, which I usually mention before we do Nyung Nä, because I mentioned about going to sleep. So you might be very tired on the fasting day, because you haven't eaten or had anything to drink, especially in the afternoon. But generally, I recommend not taking a nap, because if you do, you'll probably wake up feeling worse and very groggy. And also because then you might have trouble sleeping that evening, so the second evening, when you haven't had anything to drink for a long time. And that can be very uncomfortable if you can't sleep. Because if you're really thirsty, at least you're sleeping, so you're not feeling the thirst. But if you're awake all night feeling thirsty and hungry, it's very uncomfortable. So it's nice if you can have a nice sleep that night. So try not to sleep too much during the day. And then at night, go to bed at a reasonable time. We should finish the session by 6:30, 7 o'clock, so you'll have plenty of time if you want to go to bed. I wouldn't recommend going to bed and trying to sleep 10 hours because again, you're going to wake up early. But just, whatever your normal amount of sleep is, go to bed and plan it so that you're up the next morning at 4 o'clock for the session. Okay. Says the page numbers mentioned do not tally with the PDF format. That's surprising to me because I thought this was a printout of the PDF. But if it doesn't, okay, then tomorrow I'll fix that. I'll try to I'll go through that again with the PDF and mention all of the what page number it should be in the PDF so it's clear for you. Okay. Yeah, the supplementary prayers are not available yet, so they'll be coming tomorrow also. So hopefully everything should be tied up by the time we get here at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Okay, good. All right, so thank you. And we'll see you at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, 4 o'clock Indian time.